When a Pentagon lawyer can't say if silencing reporters violates the First Amendment, that's not just confusion. That's a constitutional crisis in slow motion.
Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A free press is right there in the First Amendment to the Constitution. But when Trump's federal communications chair was unhappy with some of Jimmy Kimmel's remarks, he said media companies, quote, can find ways to take action on Kimmel, or there's going to be additional work for the FCC. The next day, Secretary Hegseth announced that journalists at the Pentagon needed to sign a pledge not to report information DOD hasn't approved for release, including unclassified information. DOD reportedly rolled those rules back, but it wasn't Hegseth's first crackdown on journalists, and I worry it may not be the last. It is the job of a free press to uncover problems that DOD doesn't want people to know about, like military families living in mold-infested homes, or Secretary Hegseth texting classified war plans. Mr. Young, you were acting general counsel for DOD for most of 2025, and now you're nominated to be the Army's top lawyer. So let me ask you, Mr. Young, do you consider your oath to the Constitution to include the First Amendment?
Yes, Senator, I do.
Thank you. We need independent journalists at DOD now more than ever. President Trump has ignored locally elected leaders to deploy military forces to Los Angeles, to DC, to Chicago, and he's told generals he wants the military to use American cities as, quote, training grounds, close quote, and handle the, quote, enemy from within. Now, this is extremely dangerous, and we need independent journalists reporting the truth, not just whatever spin Pete Hegseth wants to put on it. So, Mr. Young, would it be consistent with the First Amendment for DOD to revoke press credentials of a reporter for publishing a story that was critical of the Trump administration?
Senator, we're very cognizant and very conscientious of the First Amendment and the freedom of the press to be able to report as needed. It was my understanding that the policy was designed to inform the members of the press. The ability to access the Pentagon is a bit different than a normal public forum.
Well, I got to stop you right there. Mr. Young, I asked you a very straightforward question. I think you can answer with a yes or no. And that is it consistent with the First Amendment for DOD to revoke press credentials of a reporter just because the reporter published a story that was critical of President Trump? That should be an easy one for a lawyer who has served as you have for many years.
Yes, Senator, I would say it would be consistent with the First Amendment if the basis was that the person published information that was not otherwise approved for release by the Department of Defense. They could still be critical. We're not getting into their content, Senator.
Well, are you telling me that the new regime is that Secretary Hegseth will decide what has been released and that reporters can only talk about what the Secretary releases? That's your view of the First Amendment?
No, Senator, I'm not saying that.
Well, then let me ask my question one more time. If a reporter publishes a story critical of the Trump administration, is that grounds for revoking that reporter's press credentials?
No, Senator, it's not.
Great. Okay, hard to get there, but I'm glad we did. Let me ask you one more question, and that is, if the courts rule any of the DOD's press restrictions unconstitutional, will you stand by your oath to the Constitution and tell the military leadership to comply with court orders? Or is your plan to bend the knee to Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth?
Certainly would advise to comply with court orders.
Okay. You know, I appreciate this. Freedom of the press is a core pillar of our democracy, and the public needs to know if sending troops to war under false pretenses or if it's exposing our troops to toxic water. This is a scary moment, but there is power in raising our voices. And that is why Donald Trump and his lackeys at the Pentagon want to shut down reporters and shut down access to the truth. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This wasn't just Elizabeth Warren sparring with a Pentagon nominee, it was a constitutional gut check in real time. The exchange you just watched wasn't about military logistics or appropriations. It was about the First Amendment itself, the oxygen of every democracy. When a nominee for the Army's top legal office can't clearly affirm that journalists have the right to publish stories critical of the government, that's not a misunderstanding, that's a warning sign. Think about what Warren was reacting to. She cited a pattern: threats from Trump's FCC chair toward media figures, new Pentagon rules forcing journalists to sign loyalty-style pledges before they could report, and internal directives that blurred the line between protecting classified information and censoring unflattering stories. That's not oversight, that's authoritarian muscle memory. The kind that starts by controlling access, labeling dissent as misinformation, and ends by narrowing what the public is allowed to know. Warren's point was simple yet profound. The First Amendment doesn't make exceptions for convenience. It doesn't say freedom of the press unless the administration disapproves. It exists precisely to protect criticism, especially when it's inconvenient, messy, or politically damaging. The idea that a Pentagon official would even hesitate to answer that question with a clear no should make anyone who values democracy sit up straight. The moment that Mr. Young said it might be consistent with the First Amendment to revoke credentials for stories not approved for release, you could hear the constitutional foundation shake. Because under that logic, the government decides what is publishable, which is the very definition of state-controlled media. That's not security, that's censorship dressed up as procedure. And Warren knew it. That's why she didn't let go. She forced him, corner by corner, into finally admitting that criticism alone is not grounds for retaliation. But this hearing wasn't just about one lawyer's interpretation. It was about a broader erosion of boundaries between political loyalty and institutional independence. When an administration treats information as a weapon, the press becomes the first target. The danger isn't just silenced journalists, it's the quiet normalization of secrecy. The idea that truth must pass through political filters before reaching the public. And when that happens inside the Pentagon, the single most powerful institution on Earth, the stakes aren't abstract. They're constitutional, moral, and generational. Remember what Warren pointed out. It's journalists who uncover mold-infested military housing, toxic water exposure, or misuse of power. Those are not stories the Pentagon is eager to tell. But without a free press, those abuses stay hidden. A democracy doesn't die in darkness, it's smothered by control. And this, ultimately, is the heartbeat of Warren's questioning. She wasn't just defending reporters, she was defending you, your right to know what your government does with your money, your soldiers, and your freedoms. She was defending the architecture of accountability that stands between democracy and dictatorship. Every time an official dodges a basic constitutional question, the line between power and principle blurs. Warren's persistence here wasn't political theater, it was institutional survival. The founders wrote the First Amendment first for a reason, because every other right depends on it. So when you hear her press, "That's not the First Amendment," understand she's not scolding, she's warning. Because the moment government decides what can be said, or who gets to say it, we stop being citizens and start being subjects. This hearing might seem like another Washington skirmish, but it's a mirror, reflecting the kind of country we're becoming when defending the Constitution sounds radical. If you believe the First Amendment still matters, that truth and transparency are not partisan privileges, like, share, and subscribe to Left Lens, because democracy doesn't protect itself. People do.